Hi everyone, and welcome to another ECN Pathway series where we're looking at a variety of career journeys and roles across UKRI. Today I'm joined by Richard Hale, who is a specialist in action learning in the leadership and learning team. So hi Richard, tell us all about your role and how you've got here to date.
Hi, good to see you, and thanks to the Early Career Network for doing this. So my role in the team, in the leadership and learning team, is very much as a focus on action learning. That's my kind of specialist field and interest in learning and development. And in particular, over the last 12 months, I've been involved in the 3 leadership programs that we've set up. So I had a role in the design of those programs, working with my colleagues, designing the material, the content with partners, and then actually involved in the delivery of those programs as well. So that involves coaching and mentoring and facilitation. And now we're into the stage of evaluation of those programs prior to kind of rolling them out on an ongoing basis. So it's been a big journey the last 12 months.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see the evaluation of those and the impact they've had. So what were you doing before your role within UKRI now?
So my career has always been in the world of people learning, leadership development. I kind of started off my career studying actually HR management before having done anything by way of HR management myself. So I went through the professional qualification as a postgrad, and very quickly got into an HR type role, which led into training and learning and ultimately leadership development. But interestingly, my starting point, my first job actually was not in the corporate world. It was in prisons and Borstalls, and I was heading a project in Kent to help ex-offenders actually who were due to come out of prison into employment. So the common factor all the way through all of my career has been an interest in people, really. And that was challenging. I mean, I was in my early 20s then, and having to go into prisons and run training and learning sessions, trying to guide people on what they do with their lives. Me, in my early 20s, dealing with some hardened criminals and, some people with, very difficult lives. But it was successful, and we managed to nationally, within Apex Charitable Trust, it was called, we managed to get a lot of people into the workplace, which is a key step in terms of preventing them going back to prison. So that was my first job, but it wasn't kind of what I'd planned. It was kind of a bit of a compromise at the time. I was hoping that I would go straight into industry. And I remember taking some advice from a professor at the time. Should I take this job? And he said, yeah, take it and do it for a year, which is what I did. And then that led me into my next steps, which were kind of into industry. Yeah. So would you like to hear a bit about that? Is that
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So first proper job, if you like, in industry was in defence engineering and computing. And it was GEC at the time, and ultimately Marconi, the avionics side. So it started again as a sort of relatively young graduate, keen that I've now landed the great job. This is my career now ahead of me, and I was given the role of heading up graduate recruitment. So quite exciting, and planned it all out. And then the organisation put a recruitment freeze on, so my whole job basically didn't exist that I got into, this dream job. And the organisation was taken over internally within the group, which was kind of quite tough at the time. I was kind of, felt pretty disappointing and a bit traumatic, and would I have a job? I remember back to that, I reflect on it, and at the time, there was a very formidable HR director within GEC who got me checked out, really, kind of put me to work temporarily with one of his people, and checked out whether I was worthy of being offered a job at the big plant, which was in Rochester in Kent. And I ended up getting moved, or offered to move, which I accepted, to a role which was more about learning and development and training in a very structured environment. And I look back on that now as that was kind of my apprenticeship. You know, it was where I kind of really learned my craft of both as a leader, because quite early on I was promoted and was leading people twice my age. That was tough, but also learning about the professional field, really, that I'd gone into. And I think, looking back on it, that HR director had spotted something in me that I might be good in a kind of more of a learning and development rather than a generalist role. So it was a key decision, partly of mine and partly out of my hands, but I ended up in this place that gave me then about 7 or 8 years of great experience when I look back on it. Yeah.
And what's been your fascination then with leadership? You must have seen lots of different leadership styles through developing leaders and being a leader yourself. So do you have any insights from all that experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've seen lots of examples of leadership, and I've been sort of, I've worked under some quite interesting leaders, you know, some of them who've led the organization. So back to GEC, and, you know, back then, the leader was Arnold Weinstock, who was a captain of industry at the time, really. So I saw a particular leader who, you know, from a distance kind of interested me in how he was doing it. He was very much focused on the money, very cautious in terms of expenditure, and very smart, and, you know, grew a successful business, which actually struggled after he'd gone, interestingly. After my experience there, I went to work in the media industry. So I worked with what became called B-Sky B, but it's British Satellite Broadcasting, and it was at the start of satellite TV in the UK. And again, interesting career move, because it looked like it could have been the great move, but it only lasted about 6 months, because again, there was the reality of corporate life. They were taken over by Rupert Murdoch and Sky Television. So from the inside, again, in a slightly more senior role now, I was head of training and development, and had to switch my role into the managing and working with the HR team in managing, you know, the takeover and the loss of lots of jobs, people that we recruited and set up we set up the first ever satellite TV structure and organization in the UK, 5 channels of TV all set up within months. But we weren't fast enough for Murdoch. So saw some really interesting sort of examples of a different style of leadership there. So our own chief exec was told, don't come in on Monday. Murdoch was in, and his henchman was a guy with quite a big reputation at the time, Sam Chisholm. And he was brought in to manage the restructure. So I saw close up at this stage, you know, some really kind of strong but leadership of a very particular style. It was quite aggressive. It was very focused. And I saw lots of organizational change impacts, really, in terms of culture, reactions to change, and to the whole change cycle, really. So I saw people who were denying that it was going to happen, but it had. It was a takeover, not really a merger. And then kind of antagonistic about it, angry about it, not kind of knowing what they were going to do, and then starting to sort of visualize the change. So I guess the pattern, when I look back on it, what I've been interested in is, yes, leadership and different types of leader who I've seen, whether it's in the workplace, or I've also worked with leaders in the world of sport and other fields. And I'm interested, I guess, in the human side of it. And if I look back on my career, that's the kind of pattern. I've always been interested in people, which sounds a bit trite when people say, oh, I want to do something to do with people. But when I look back on my career, that's been the common pattern, whether it was in the prisons, in the engineering firm, in broadcasting, or indeed what I'm doing now with UKRI. I'm interested in people as individuals, but also how people communicate and work in groups and teams socially. So I'm quite a strong believer in the kind of social, looking at the social psychology of what's going on in the workplace, not just the individual psychology, because whatever we're doing, usually whether it's in a laboratory or it's in a team or a funding team or whatever it might be, we're having to work with other people. And that's been my kind of theme, I guess, throughout my career.
Yeah, and you mentioned you're sort of a specialist in action-based learning. What is that?
Okay, that's a good question. So it's described quite simply as bringing people together in groups, learning groups, in order to tackle complex and messy organizational challenges or problems. In a nutshell, that's what it is. There's a theory behind it, which was developed actually by somebody who started out in the world of science, some time ago, Professor Reg Revens. And what he noticed in the laboratories, physics laboratories, the Cavendish, working under Rutherford and the like, was that often the breakthroughs that happened in science came from people working not necessarily with what they do know, but also embracing what they don't know and being willing to actually put their hands up and say, I don't know, please help me. So, that sounds kind of obvious and easy to do, but it's actually culturally very difficult to do, particularly when you're working with, real specialists and subject matter experts. So, it's but what he recognized was the value could be taken to the organizational setting. And that's really what I've picked up on and followed over the last 20 years, this belief that you can bring about human change in organizations and organizational change by bringing people together, coalescing around real issues, real challenges. So they might be about, my team is dysfunctional, so how can help me sort of work out how to tackle this? Or, we have some real challenges with psychological safety, so how can we tackle that? Or we're in a workplace with 5 generations of employee. How do we get that to work and become a positive? So these are kind of problems for which there's no kind of training course that will tell you the answer. You've got to work through them. There's an aspect of this which is also kind of a little bit countercultural. I recognize if you're from, particularly maybe if you're from a scientific background, and that is that we start initially with the action in action learning rather than with the theory. So you start with the real problem and you bring that to the group and you say, this is my problem, because stuff has already happened. There's already been some action, or I'm going to take some action. What action should I take to deal with this problem? And then you go to the theory and you say, okay, so what can I learn from the latest thinking around the psychology of psychological safety or whatever it might be. So you draw in the theory in order to tackle real problems. So I got interested in this and developed a methodology, which we're using actually at UKRI, which is called Action Learning Questions, which is a quite structured approach to doing action learning. And there have been some great, already within a year, some great examples of people who've taken real business and organizational challenges and with the help of each other in cross-council groups, actually made a difference. And I'm kind of interested at this from a systemic perspective as well, not just individuals making a change, but how do we actually make a change, organizationally and culturally. So yeah, that's a long answer to your question about what is action learning. But I did get kind of quite intrigued partway through my career in what's the academics behind all this? So, I've been involved in the subject of learning throughout my career, and often noticed that organisations were doing things just because the next organisation was doing it or because it was a trend. And I wanted to look in more depth at relationships of people in terms of learning, mentoring in particular. So I did an action-based doctorate in action, using action learning and action research to study learning relationships. And it seems a strange way maybe to do it, but it was kind of halfway through my career that I went down that route rather than doing a sort of the classic, do your degree and then a master's and then a doctorate. But it was based on the reality, I guess, of what I was experiencing and was passionate about, was interested in. I wanted to look into this in more depth rather than just implement initiatives because the next organization was doing it or because it's a trend,
Yeah. And so I guess we've looked to the past now. What's your goal for the next year to 5 years, and what are you really hoping to achieve personally or within a work setting?
Yeah, it's a big question, that. I think from an organizational perspective, I can see where we can take where we've got to further. So what we've done in a year is pilot programs, and I've got a kind of vision which I'm discussing and sharing with colleagues, and we're collaborating to develop it. But I see that we can build more of an accredited route for the learning that we're offering within the organization. There's a lot that we can do to take the methodology further and to support the vision and the strategy for UKRI. So one of the other aspects of that I'm working on currently is creating more internal capability in facilitating action learning. So it doesn't always have to be the supposed expert. Now that we've been exposed to it, and about 200 people have been through an action learning based program in the last 12 months. So there are a number of those who could potentially become facilitators, and we create internal capability. So that's something that I'm quite interested in. To answer your question on a more personal perspective, I guess, for me at my stage of my career, I'm interested in what's my legacy, in a sense. That sounds very grand, what's my legacy? But I am interested in, can I still make a contribution even at my stage and age? And can I connect across generations? So it's really good to connect with the Early Careers Network in that sense, personally. And, can I stay relevant? Somebody said to me recently, it's about how do you stay relevant, so I took that on board. I think that's a good challenge. If I could just kind of say, well, I've done enough now and I'll spend my time walking around a golf course, but I don't think I'd feel too relevant. I'm not that good at golf. Yeah, I think those are the things that I'm looking to do going forward, and to keep refining and improving the methods that I've developed. And I'm delighted that they've been picked up. It's taken quite a long journey, a long haul, because some of the things I've described to you that we're doing are a little bit counter to the norm. So they're quite challenging, and in some cases I've found accreditation from universities for the methodology that we're using, which is actually, kind of counter the university's mindset in business schools, certainly, around, knowledge is taught from the theory to start with. And I'm saying, no, we start with the questions rather than start with the content, and then the content follows the questions. So, it's taken a few battles that I've had and to find the right people to work with over the last 20 years, actually. And it's good, it's great now to, great feeling that people are recognizing there's some kind of, sense perhaps in what we've done, and I've proven it in a few different contexts in different sectors. And I was delighted a year ago when UKRI said, could I come and help? Because here I had a kind of a big organisation, very complex organisation. And for me, the big question, my own personal leadership question or action learning question was, how can I actually scale the approach that I've used elsewhere on a bigger scale, but very relevant to, our agenda and purpose within the UK. So yeah, that's how I see it for the future. Yeah, does that help?
Yeah, and do you have a final tip for anyone early in their career that's listening?
Yeah, I think it might be one or two tips. So I guess there are one or two people who've influenced me in my life and my career. So, one was my father, and he said, the world doesn't owe you a living. And he kept saying that throughout my life. And I thought, what does he really mean? And I think I get it now that, you have to go out there and make it work for yourself. So there's that. The other tip I had from my mother, which I would pass on, was take the opportunities that come your way, because you don't know if they're going to come again. And she may have been speaking a bit about herself and her own life in saying that, but it was good. It was good advice. So some of these things that you're told early on, they do stick with you. And then the other sort of final one I would give as a tip, because I only heard this recently. I was listening to the radio, and there was a country singer who was talking about a song that he had written. And the song had a strange title. It's called Buy Dirt. But the line in it caught my attention, and it was, do what you love, but call it work. And I thought, that's a great line. And I thought I better check the song out, and went and listened to it and understood the context of it. But I think that would be great advice for people early in their career. And when I look back on my career, it's kind of what I did. I didn't follow I did a professional qualification initially, and I did some academic stuff later. But the common thread was working with what I actually love, which was working with the complexities of people and the human side of organizations. So I just kind of kept doing that and focusing on that. Yeah.
Oh, well, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.